This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, my name is Kelly Kiedis Ogborn, and thank you for joining our third live webinar. Today we are going to talk about the importance of building coalitions around technology and dive into a concept that we like to call social capital. I believe it is important for those in the research and development community to start thinking about social capital as a business asset, and more importantly, to start thinking about their work in a larger context. A common mistake that companies and individuals make when transitioning technology, which is either taking it from your head to the government to develop it, taking it from government funding to the private sector to commercialize it, or taking it from the lab to a more mature level of government to operationalize it, is the assumption that the technology and the concept will be enough, that it will stand on its own. In my experience, I have seen many projects fail to bridge the virtual chasm between applied research and tech transition. And part of the reason we built HS Draconis was because we were frustrated by how many important and transformative ideas were failing to go anywhere. What's interesting to me is that oftentimes the failure doesn't stem from the technical aspects themselves, but rather from a lack of creating a space for them. In other words, the mechanisms hadn't been set up yet to allow for that transition. And the reason that this happens is because many times in the pursuit of technological development, innovation is created in a vacuum with little to no foresight into the broader forces that drive it forward. And while it is great to have a laser-focused goal, you cannot ignore the process to get you there. Perhaps there is an application of a component of your technology that you hadn't considered before. Or maybe the audience you are eventually looking to target wants something currently not in your scope of development or something different altogether. Successful transition is rarely a linear path, and business opportunities are still largely people-driven. The goal of this webinar is to give you a high-level understanding of the types of entities and people that you should be engaging during your product development stage to ensure that when your technology is ready to jump, there's a place for it to go. Ultimately, what it comes down to is understanding that it's about more than your technology. In order to successfully transition, you have to make people care, and you have to speak in a language that they understand. It is more critical for them to understand the impact rather than the mechanics of your work. And leveraging your social capital can be a potent asset to help you do this. Let's think of it this way. In order to have a business, you need to have customers because customers translate into money. Capital is absolutely critical to success, but the savviest entrepreneurs understand that human capital invested in your idea is just as important. People are required to build curiosity and hope about what a new innovation can achieve. In other words, you need to work with others to create a space for your technology within their context. Without that, it will fail, regardless of its quality or potential or technical achievements. Now, I'm sure that most of you watching are familiar with this concept of the technology valley of death, when a technology has been proven and ready for transition into the market, but there is nowhere for it to land. Often, this is because the right conversations were not being had and the right pathways were not being primed in tandem. You can think about it like throwing a party before inviting your guests, and then calling them 5 minutes before, expecting them to 1, arrive on time, 2, arrive on theme, and 3, arrive with the side dish. The chances of that happening are really slim. Instead, what you need to do is lay the groundwork. You need to send the invitations. You need to know your guests and what they enjoy and what they don't enjoy, and then you need to execute that whole strategy accordingly. The same is true of technology transition. You need an evolution of ideas, but you also need smart, thoughtful, and intentional collaboration with a coalition of the right people. Too many individuals and companies can get tunnel vision when sprinting toward the finish line, which is their product launch, but that laser focus that drives research and development forward can significantly deter long-term success. Essentially, it's after that product launch phase where that yellow star is when the business elements begin to kick in. And those business elements are people. But you need to engage your coalition and your social capital in tandem with your technology development and during the research and development phase to ensure that those business elements are seamless. So when you get to the product launch, you have an army of people backing you up. Going back to the party analogy, it's so that when you throw that party, everyone is already lined up in the VIP section. But before we begin and dive into social capital, I want to say a quick word about this concept of competing worldviews, and more specifically, scientific truths and political truths, both of which need to be incorporated into a winning strategy. As I mentioned earlier, your technology on its own is not enough, and arguably there are two proofs of concept. The first is if your technology works, and the second is if there's a place in the market for it. Now, fortunately, there is no shortage of demand for innovation, but what there is a shortage of is knowledge. And it's knowledge of the proper steps that one must take to create a space for your technology. There are many components that play a key role in successful commercialization, but more often than not, people will be your biggest driving force. And it will be people and their influence to push your idea over the top, whether it be through policy implementation, helping make connections for you, influencing your customers, being advocates, giving you funding, helping you with market knowledge, or simply just word of mouth. And this really gets at the crux of the competing worlds idea. There are scientific truths and there are political truths. Now, scientific truths are the black and white, hard concepts of how your product or service works. And political truths are slightly different. So by political truths, I do not mean actual policies and laws passed by the government, although there are many cases that those do apply. But what I'm talking about here are those gray area, intangible motivations that help drive decisions forward. Two examples I can give is the first, if you think about congressional funding decisions. Does the success of your technology displace a company or manufacturing facility in someone's district? If so, politics may trump the better and more effective scientific idea. A business decision example is, does your technology directly compete with another company that has a lot of support already in the industry? Or will the realization of your technological concepts completely displace a sector of working people? Regardless of how great, groundbreaking, relevant, or necessary your innovation is, you will be met with opposition because it could be creating a very uncomfortable place for other people. The way you overcome this, though, is through coalitions, and you want to create a healthy and diverse one. They exist so that you don't have to forge the path alone. As I mentioned before, the valley of death is the gap between applied research and technology transition, while coalitions help bridge the knowledge gap between esoteric science and technological issues and introduce them into a broader culture. Essentially, they create warm leads and help create a place for your technology to go. So what is this idea of social capital? What social capital is it means building a diverse coalition of champions and stakeholders who not only understand your technology, but also see its broader potential. You need early adopters of your ideas, and you need advocacy. It is imperative for lawmakers and investors to understand what technologies are coming down the pipeline so they can help create pathways for larger adoption. If you wait until the final steps of your product development and launch, you will find yourself behind the curve and deep into the valley of death. The other reason you want to invest in social capital is for 4 critical reasons. The first is for differentiation. Getting new takes on your technology will help draw you out of an echo chamber of sameness and amplify the possible impact of your work into different markets. If you think about current industries, companies and people say about plus and minus 20% of the same thing. When you get out of that echo chamber, it helps you see opportunities more clearly, but it can also help you find better leads in new areas. The second is the multiplication of your opportunities, going off of what I said in differentiation, but all too often, people only communicate to their base when they should be casting a wider net. The next is that it provides reinforcement. The bottom line here is that there really is no reason why you need to forge your scalability path alone. And the fourth is diversifying your knowledge base. Success requires more than a good idea. You need an understanding of your markets. You need business growth expertise. You need funding, influence, policy, advocacy. All of these capabilities are critical components to your success, and all of them are elements that you don't necessarily need to have in-house. No one achieves success alone. And what I find ironic is that more and more today, companies are spending millions of dollars trying to humanize their products, when in fact, the best way to humanize is to interact with actual humans. You can find surprising insights about your technology and marketability by simply talking to a diverse set of people and getting their input, and more importantly, getting their excitement and buy-in. So what are the components of social capital? We have identified 6 main areas, which are policy, advocacy, influence, market knowledge, network, and product validation. What's important to note is that not all of these might apply to you now or ever. It depends on what you were trying to accomplish at that time. Engaging social capital is circumstantial and it is a sliding scale. But if you think at some point that you will need to engage a particular aspect of these, don't ignore it and wait until you do. The best way to think about it is an arsenal of tools that you can deploy at various times, and each of them have a very specific strategy behind them. And these strategies must be done in tandem with your technology development, or at the very least, the strategy must be activated about 6 to 8 months prior to your product launch. Now let's discuss how you can begin to build yours, and the first step is understanding who are these people that you should be engaging. So on this screen, we have the first 3, and the first one is policy. So this isn't necessarily people, but it's legislation or regulations that need to change or be created for your technology or your product to be successful. A perfect example of this is if you think about the drone industry. When drones were first created and developed, they were purely meant at that time for military use. Then they came to the commercial world, and all of a sudden you had these autonomous vehicles with potential cameras and other technology flying over people's homes, and regulation had to catch up with the technological prowess of these machines. What you want to think about is that when your technology is realized, is it going to create problems in the commercial world that are unforeseen? And if so, how do you help mitigate that by engaging regulations, either creating them or changing them to make them successful for you? The second is advocacy. These aren't necessarily customers. Rather, what it is are people and services your product affects that can help spread your message and get you broader exposure. The groups you want to think about here is who is going to benefit from your work. The reason you want to create advocates, a lot of people have laser focus on just their customer base, but advocates have a much broader reach and generally help amplify ideas and products coming down the road. They also are going to be in meetings and conversations with people beyond your reach. So take a look at who is going to be influenced and actually benefit from your work. And it's worth engaging them and letting them know the art of the possible of what you bring to the table, and get them excited about your work so they can carry the message for you. The next is influence. So influence are individuals, companies, and industries that influence your potential customers and target markets. One thing to note here is that this influence isn't always positive. So there are definitely positive influencers that your customers listen to. You absolutely want to engage them to get them excited about your work. But who could be a potential detractor? Are there tangential or adjacent industries to yours that technologies are coming about that are going to make yours obsolete? Another thing you want to think about in terms of influence is that sometimes it's not necessarily a person, but it's a status quo. When companies think about, in any early stage of a company, people will sit down and jot down who their competitors are. Sometimes their competitors are a status quo, and that is a form of influence. So is there an ideology or an industry standard that has been held true forever that you're trying to disrupt? If that's the case, you need to find a way to put out thought leadership pieces or be able to influence your base to show that you're actually going to make a breakthrough and a positive impact on the industry. The next three are market knowledge, network, and product validation. So for market knowledge, this is essentially understanding who is setting the trends and informing the market that you want to break into, and also who's informing your customer base. This is understanding, are there specific conferences that they attend? Are there certain publications that they read? If you have the opportunity and it's critical to your strategy, you would want to go to those conferences. You would potentially want to publish thought leadership pieces in the area that is actually your customers are putting eyes on. The next is your network. So this is understanding who you can be interacting with beyond your peer group. Most professionals go to a lot of networking events, but generally those networking events tend to be in the same sort of vein. What I challenge a lot of people to do that we work with is to figure out what adjacent industries you can also be attending and widen your net. The reason you want to do this is for a couple of reasons. The first is it's really beneficial just to practice your pitch and to talk about your technology. And also you might find surprising applications to your work that you hadn't thought of. Some of my greatest business breakthroughs have come from talking to people that are in nowhere related to the work I do, because it makes you think about your work in different contexts and potentially opens the aperture for opportunities. And then the last is product validation. This generally applies to smaller companies, but it can apply to larger as well. This is if you need independent third-party approval, prototyping, or partnerships for scalability. It's really difficult for small companies to get some sort of clout and support, especially in the research and development and S&T world, where a lot of it is dominated by household names. What you want to think through here is that in order for you to be successful, do you need to get buy-in from some of those household names to say that you're credible? Are you going to need to create partnerships so that when your idea gets past a TRL 1 through 3, there's somebody there that can actually do the prototyping for you, or a manufacturing facility that you can use that you don't have to put the money in to develop? Are there partnerships for scalability? It's essentially just thinking about 8 to 10 months down the road and understanding some of those shortcomings that you might have. And you want to start greasing the wheels now so that when you get to that point, you're a known entity with them and that it's a warm lead. So that is a very, very high level understanding of the elements of social capital. We just began to scratch the surface. I understand that this concept is somewhat counter to how a lot of technologists think, but if you have further questions, please send me an email or check out our website. We'd be more than happy to help you accomplish your goals. Thank you very much.